This is section 2.4 of AP Microeconomics. Let's get started. Previously, we talked about elasticity of demand, which measures consumers' sensitivity to price changes. This measures producers' sensitivity to price changes. So with law of supply, it says as price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. But how much does it go up? And that's what elasticity measures. To what degree? Okay. If it's elastic, then quantity supplied is very sensitive to those price changes. Producers are very sensitive, and if price goes up, they'll supply a lot more. Inelastic is the opposite. It means they're not supplying as much, and they're less sensitive to price changes. So their quantity supplied won't change that much. It's literally the exact formula as elasticity demand, except you have quantity supplied in the numerator instead of quantity demanded. So seems like two formulas, it's really only one. Now, when we measure these percentage changes in all these formulas, and you'll see a few more in a minute here, or in the next video, this is the formula we can use. There's also a midpoint formula. College Board does accept both. This is a growth rate formula you should have used in math and other subjects. It just makes more sense to continue with the formula you're familiar with. If you take the new value minus the old value divided by the old times 100, that'll tell you the percentage change. So if price went from 10 to 12, you'd say 12 minus 10 divided by 10, and that ends up being 20%. Okay. Now, elasticity of demand is always negative, even though it is an absolute value. Before the absolute value, it does have a negative. Elasticity of supply will always be positive. And that's because it's upward sloping. As one variable goes up, the other does as well. Same values for elasticity of supply that are there for elasticity of demand. Again, the only difference is that we have elasticity of supply instead of demand. All right? But like even the infinity for demand, elasticity of demand was perfectly elastic. For supply, elasticity of supply is perfectly elastic. So if you have perfectly inelastic items, whether it's demand or supply, you have an elasticity that is equal to 0. All right. And then the determinants of elasticity of supply, well, availability of resources. So if you think about an input for an item that might be scarce or it's very difficult to substitute, you'd be less elastic, okay, less sensitive to those price changes. And if it's easier to find a substitute or an input, then you're going to be more likely to change your quantity supplied as you go with something else. Now, time is a big deal. This is something we'll talk about more later on. But for time, if you have more time to respond to price change, just like consumers, it's more elastic. All right. So here's some examples. You can see those. There's not much meat on the bone for supply. Much of the elasticity from the College Board centers around demand, with a few options for the next section, which you'll see here in a minute that we're going to discuss. Elasticity supply has a small place in there, but certainly demand is more important. The total revenue test only applies to demand, not to supply. There's another difference. All right. So, all right, that's it for elasticity of supply.